Hey everyone, I'm here with my good friend Johnny. We're really happy to announce a brand new documentary series called Lo-Fi Docs, where we highlight really interesting stories. This particular episode is about the Wonderland Murders here in LA, but please check out our main channel, Lo-Fi Docs, on all social media, including YouTube, and please drop a like and leave a comment. We would really appreciate it, and we'll see you guys very soon. I'm like SpongeBob with the glasses, like,
Okay. Hey, Patrick.
I feel like I've been here before. Hard to get anything done, the bureaucratic red tape that stymies so much legislation out here. Who doesn't love living in that? Every time I see these things, watch someone with ADD talk. So we are heading towards Laurel Canyon, where the Wonderland gang had their primary, if not only residence, on Wonderland Avenue. It sounds completely made up, but it actually is called Wonderland Avenue. And the Wonderland gang were this sort of ragtag bunch of different walks of life people that were all being led by the gang's leader, Ron Lanius. And their drug of choice was, because it's the 80s now, was cocaine. And this was the late 70s, early 80s. They became acquainted with, and he was one of their, I guess you could say, confidants in a way, but certainly one of their customers was John Holmes. John Holmes, famous porn actor of the late 60s and 70s, and had pretty much been on a downturn because of his drug addiction. In fact, his career was so well known that the film Boogie Nights was actually loosely based on his life. But anyway, so John Holmes he would go to this very house that we're going to, and he was a close friend of Eddie. Well, I shouldn't close friend, but he was also a hangers-on for Eddie Nash. So Eddie Nash was also in the drug business, and he was also acquainted with many of the, mafiosos of the day out here. And John Holmes, who, again, would oscillate between these people, and I'm sure many other people, he became indebted to the Wonderland gang because he was buying so much of their drugs, he owed them a lot of money, or at least a good amount. So John allegedly concocted a plan with the Wonderland gang, with Ron Lanius, and several other members of the gang to go to Eddie Nash's house and steal said jewelry, money, and drugs. John Holmes went to Eddie Nash's mansion and left open the day of the burglary. Now, this is 2 days before or so of the actual Wonderland murders. He went to Eddie Nash's house, left open a sliding door, left it unlocked, and then that very night, members of the Wonderland gang went to his house. Eddie Nash was there along with his security guard of sorts, or his underling, and they bound Eddie Nash as well as his security guard, robbed him of his jewelry, money, drugs that he had at the house, which apparently was substantial. And they apparently further embarrassed Eddie Nash by making him beg for his life, which he took, as I think many people would, he took that very seriously and personally, because Eddie Nash was a very revengeful person, as I read. So they let him live, they walked away, and Eddie Nash became incredibly furious and just wanted to know who was responsible for this. And apparently, I think the next day, the very person that was also held and bound with Eddie Nash said that he saw John Holmes with a piece of Eddie's jewelry on, walking somewhere, and said, hey, listen, Eddie had something to do with this. Or sorry, John had something to do with this. So they brought John Holmes back to Eddie Nash's mansion, and along with a witness present, they essentially tortured him and said, what happened? We know he has something to do with this. Who was it? And John eventually said, hey, listen, it was the Wonderland gang. They live. They're at this house. They're the ones who did it. They're the ones who robbed you. And Annie Nash allegedly was like, okay. He apparently was going. He allegedly was going to kill John Holmes, but said, actually, you know what? I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to actually make an example out of you. So apparently, he sent henchmen over to the Wonderland house that we're almost near now, along with John Holmes, allegedly. And John Holmes let the henchmen into the house because, he was, a friend of them. They had no reason to think he would be doing anything duplicitous. There's a word for you. And it was nighttime, so this was July 1st, 1981. 3:00 in the morning. These 4 henchmen show up at this very home, and their 5 intended targets were actually not all there. 3 of them were, including Ron Lanius, the head of the Wonderland gang. And with metal pipes and claw hammers, savagely beat 5 people, 4 of them to death. One person, Suzanne Richardson, who was actually the wife of, I believe, Ron Lanius. She actually sustained permanent amnesia and significant physical limitations throughout the rest of her life. But she actually managed to live. But since she had no memory of what happened, she could not pinpoint or explain who was responsible, let alone remember what happened. So we're actually here. This is Wonderland Avenue and Wonderland Park Avenue. So over here to the left now I've actually never been here before. This is the hills of LA. Obviously very narrow streets. So one car going one way, the other way, you have to wait and yield. So we're going to attempt now to actually see if we can park here for a second, because like I said, these streets are incredibly narrow. So us idling for too long is probably not going to work, and we can't pull in someone's driveway because that's also not going to work either. It's actually on our right. So the address is, I'm not going to say the address. You guys look it up. It's right there. This one right here, the white one. All right, so here we are on Wonderland Avenue. Directly behind me, the very townhome there in white used to be the headquarters of the Wonderland gang, headed by Ron Lanius. So on July the 1st, 1981, 2 days after the robbery of Eddie Nash's home, not far from here, 4 members of the Wonderland gang, although 5 people were beaten savagely, 4 of them ended up losing their lives. One, Suzanne Richardson, ended up surviving, although she did have permanent amnesia and did not remember a thing about the night in question. But 4 members of the Wonderland gang, including the gang's leader, Ron Lanius, were savagely beaten to death with metal pipes and claw hammers around 3:00 in the morning, allegedly with the intervention of John Holmes, who let them into this very home behind us. This home served as a den and as a base of operations for the Wonderland gang and their illicit drug trade, which was, again, cocaine. But this house had all manner of drug paraphernalia and large amounts of cash stowed in it that apparently was quite substantial. But this very quiet, small street, home to one of the most infamous murder cases in LA history, and this very townhouse behind us. Hello. Hi. Did she come out of that house? She come out of that house? Maybe. Want to ask her really quick?
Oh, sorry. Sorry about place.
All right, so we were told to leave. We were attempting to get more establishing shots of the building, and this is a residential street, so people live here, and we respect that. So we got what we needed anyway. But yeah, it's much like the John Sowden house of the Dahlia case. This has, again, it's on a really sleepy, old part of the hills here. These are old townhouses that, actually, I was surprised to see how a good number of them need, a lot of, repair and all that. These are old. worn houses. They do have character, though, to them. But, yeah, this was, for a time, a big drug den for the Wonderland gang. It was their base of operations. So now it's a really sweepy, is that a word? It's a combination, sweepy, like a little kid. A sweepy house. It's a really sleepy townhouse in a really old part of the hills that we were told to get the hell out of here.
Have a blessed day, ma'am. You look great.
So we're going downtown again. There's a lot of things that happen down there, don't you know? So we're going downtown to the LA Superior Courthouse, or one of them. So the reason for that is this Wonderland case. They had a crap ton of different court cases with this case, trying different people that they tried to hold accountable for the respective murders of the 4 people that lost their lives that day, and they never were able to have any charges that sticked. Of the 2 major players that were considered high-end suspects in this case, Eddie Nash and John Holmes, none of them, with the exception of, I'm sure we just added 3 minutes onto our time. Perfect. You know, I never understood not really fascination. I always thought, like, tire swings were so... I had a bad experience on one.
On a tire swing?
On a tire swing. I think it was when I was really small, when I was young. Like, oh, really? Not when you were like 2 days ago? Like you struck yourself? But I think it was they're like big tractor trailer tires, right? So they're gigantic and they have those big wells inside. And I think I fell into it, and I was stuck, and I was just so mortified by the experience. I always kind of just completely avoided them. And anytime they were part of like jungle gym or some sort of, swing set, I always just leered at the thing. Like it was, like they were all the same. Like, I know what you did. Where am I going with this? But yeah, just avoid tire swings, everyone. I don't like touching the buttons. Only $4.50 for an hour? What a deal. All right, so we're here in downtown LA, specifically where all the federal courthouses are. As you can see them behind me, there's a few that dot the landscape behind here. I'm sure all of them have been here for a while. That one right there is the actual, I think, United States Supreme Courthouse right there, which is kind of fun. So as it relates to the Wonderland cases today. Feels like nighttime. We're overcast as hell. As it relates to the Wonderland cases, so post the actual murder, several attempts were made by legislators and justices to get Eddie Nash and John Holmes, who were considered the top suspects in this crime, despite the rather sheer amount of circumstantial evidence that tied both gentlemen to the actual case itself. With the notable exception of Eddie Nash in particular, who in his first trial, it was a hung jury, and then his second trial, he was acquitted. And the reason he was acquitted for the first attempt from being brought to trial on this case was because he paid one of the jurors $50,000 to vote not guilty. You never really get to see with unsolved cases like this such a big boatload of like judicial justice that unfortunately never found an ending that was satisfactory. You usually just get none of that in unsolved cases. There may be suspects that people are like, hey, I think, this person really did it, but we don't really know. In this case, there was a lot. Another really interesting thing as it relates to Eddie Nash. So years after his first acquittal and hung jury, that whole thing, he was actually brought up on RICO charges. So this would be racketeering and money laundering, as well as conspiracy for the Wonderland murders themselves without specifically being charged with the actual committing of the crimes and ordering of them. Just conspiracy. He actually pled guilty to all of that, including and admitting to paying the first time he was brought up on charges. He admitted and pled guilty to paying one of the jurors $50,000. He said, yeah, listen, I did all that. And he was actually convicted and given, I believe, 8 to 10 years, but only served 3. And apparently years later, one of his subordinates had jokingly mentioned, or maybe was serious, and said that he had paid the judge $100,000 to lessen his sentence and give him time served. So the guy was notorious in many ways, very hard to pin down, and his money got him out of a lot of his issues. One thing I've noticed is, why do all federal buildings smell like a library? I'm getting like a sense of library smell coming from the doors right behind me. So how does that relate to what I just said? It has nothing to do with it. That's the one thing about downtown, is you are going to smell pee. So get ready for it. So for all you travelers out there, if you come to LA, come to downtown especially, you're going to smell pee. That is an old window, by the way. That's old. All right, so regarding John Holmes, so he was actually brought up on charges initially before Eddie Nash was. John Holmes was almost considered a suspect immediately in the Wonderland murders. And he was framed by the prosecution as not only being a major contributor, if not outright the perpetrator of the actual crimes, but sort of the mastermind behind them, because he was connected to both Eddie Nash and the Wonderland gang. And when he was brought up on charges, he was charged with all of the murders because a palm print of his that belonged to him was actually found on one of the headboards of the victims. And that's what tied him to the actual crime scene itself. And then during the case, which he was later acquitted for, the defense did what seems to be a masterful job at painting him as not necessarily innocent, but someone who was just there by happenstance. He had nothing to do with the actual committing of the crimes. He did not order them. And he was a victim of happenstance. And that defense worked. The jury found him not guilty, and he was acquitted of all charges. The case still followed him throughout the rest of his life. He was never able to, he was already on a downward turn in his career, and he was never able to recover from that. And unfortunately, or some would say fortunately, he died a relatively early death in the late 80s. But he was considered a high-end suspect in this case. He certainly was implicated and certainly was involved. But he was never formally charged, or at least successfully charged in this crime. That's all I got, man. I don't know. It's where they stable the horses if the cops go in and shit, right? They have to keep those horses somewhere, In case you don't know what a horse sounds like when it's walking, I can actually peer inside. I'm actually going to. What if when I looked at... Well, I'm just going to do it. Yeah, it's just a walk path. And the heart of the justice system of LA is right here, where so many famous cases, infamous, famous, have all come through these doors, including elements of the Wonderland murders. But no one was ever formally held responsible for murder. That happens... one time is enough, right? So, but in this case, still unsolved. And, you'd like to think that, I don't know where I'm going with this, but you'd like to think that if you were ever to be a victim of something like that, not that you'd ever think about it in your final moments because you have many other things on your mind, but you'd like to think that if you were the victim of a violent crime like that at the very least, you'd be able to be the people that were responsible would be held accountable. But I think we've known far too often in many different instances, just in this country alone, that unfortunately is not always the case. That's depressing to think about, isn't it? That's what I'm here for. Optimism. Okay, so now we're heading towards what used to be the Starwood Nightclub, which from the early or so 70s to around the early 80s was one of a many few music nightclubs that showcased up-and-coming musical talent. Van Halen most famously got their start at this nightclub and played a few spots here. And Starwood Nightclub was owned by Eddie Nash, who owned a series of nightclubs in Los Angeles, this just being one of many. And Eddie Nash was actually the son of a very wealthy Palestinian family. He was born in a city just outside of Jerusalem and moved here when he was very young, or youngish, with no money. I don't know. I still don't understand how that was the case, where his family apparently owned 48 hotels in and around that area of the world. And I don't know why he came out here. I mean, if you're living in that kind of comfortability, why leave? But anyway, he came out here with apparently nothing and built up a empire of owning a series of nightclubs, which he bankrolled by selling drugs and embroiling himself with a whole bunch of unsavory characters of the time, most of them being from the Israeli mafia, the Italian mafia, and other unscrupulous people. But anyway, the Starwood was among many nightclubs that he owned, and he actually surprisingly, well, I shouldn't say surprisingly, I mean, it just makes sense financially. A lot of his clubs catered towards many different crowds. He had a nightclub devoted to just African Americans. He had a club that was just frequented by gays. He had clubs that were frequented by Hispanic people. He just had clubs that catered to all different niches, just to kind of serve different communities. And apparently it was also as a front for his drug empire as well. So, but yeah, so we're headed there now, and I think now it's just a restaurant. But yeah, it used to be called the Starwood Club. I don't really like the name, if I'm being honest. Starwood. Doesn't really roll off the tongue, does it?
I guess maybe it's like stars in Hollywood kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like. I like the words used. I just don't like them together. It's ridiculous. Isn't it like a foundational pillar? I guess not. I don't know.
I think it's pivotal.
It's a pivotal pillar. You're good, buddy. All right, so we're back here in, you guessed it, West Hollywood. How does this relate to the Wonderland Murders? Well, rather loosely, but directly behind me used to be what was back in the 70s and early 80s, the Starwood Nightclub, which a lot of musical acts got their start, including Van Halen, most famously. But during the 70s, this was a pretty popular nightclub owned by Eddie Nash, one of a great many that he owned. This was one he owned in West Hollywood. And rather funnily, as we were doing research for this very video, we saw that the nightclub opened around 1973 and closed about a month before the Wonderland Murders in 1981. So this would be in June. Probably, I'm not sure how much connecting tissue there is there, but just kind of a fun little information there for you. But so, yeah, this club was open for less than a decade, but it was one of a great many nightclubs that Eddie Nash owned. And apparently it was bankrolled and he was able to own it and operate it as a front for drug activity. which is how he was able to have so many nightclubs here in LA. But yeah, it used to be called the Starwood, and before that was called PJ's. Why would you call a nightclub PJ's? I have no idea. Kind of like the name, though. I like it better than Starwood. PJ's sounds kind of like, fun. Let's go to PJ's. All right, thank you very much for checking out our Lo-Fi Docs episode of the Wonderland Murders. We had a lot of fun making it. Be sure to leave a like and a comment below, and also a dislike if that's, your thing. Some of you have been doing that. We've noticed. We know that. We see you. Anyway, please check us out on our main channel, on all socials, and on YouTube as well. We'll see you guys in the next one. It's like singing the Muffin Man song in a British accent. It was before that too, but like before we got the phone, just like talking, and I'm like, "Gee, you dude," and then as we're on the phone, I'm just like,